Hello class, today I'll be teaching you how to graph y equals -3 cosecant x. So I wrote it out there. This also equals y equals -3 over sine x. So now we'll be able to graph it better. We got to make sure that the x doesn't equal 0, pi, 2 pi, and then negative pi, and negative 2 pi. Because that's what our asymptotes are going to be when we graph it. So we'll graph those right here. Say 2 pi, dotted line for your asymptote. And then, negative 2 pi actually, and negative pi right here. That's your asymptote. 0 is right here. And then pi will be right here, and 2 pi will be right here. Dotted line for your asymptote. Okay, then make a little XY chart. You gotta find a middle point between these two. So in between 0 and pi, there is pi over 2. So mark that. Pi over 2, and the middle point between pi and 2 pi is 3 pi over 2, so like 1.5 basically. 3 pi over 2, and those are your middle points for that. The same thing goes on this side. So now we'll plug in for x, pi over 2, which is our mark right there, and y again equals -3 over sine, and for your x you'll plug in pi over 2. Now sine pi over 2 is equal to 1, so that's basically -3 over 1, so -3 over 1 equals -3. So then you go down to -3. So 1, 2, 3. You mark -3. -3 is down here. And that's how you find one of your points for your graph. Again, in between 0 and pi, go down -3 because that's the y that we got, right? Then, again, you plug in 3 pi over 2 because that's another midpoint we got, right? -3 over sine 3 pi over 2. 3 pi over 2 is equal to -1, so -3 over -1 equals 3. So then you go again from the x-axis up 3, 1, 2, 3, mark 3. You go to 3 pi over 2, mark the 3 up here. For a cosecant graph, you're going to get an up or down U. The higher point on your graph goes up. So we make a U like that. You got to keep it in between the asymptotes. And your higher point goes up and your lower point goes down. Again, stay in between the asymptotes. You make a U. Now you look at that. You can get the same thing on the other side. So you go here, up 3, make a U, right? skip 1, right here, same thing, down -3. Another u, and that is how you graph the cosecant of y equals -3 cosecant x. And as you can see, both of our graphs are odd.
All right, y equals 2 cosecant x plus pi over 4 plus 1. So what you're first going to want to do is make it y equals 2 sine x plus pi over 4 plus 1. And you're going to want to label your period, your amplitude, your phase shift, and your vertical shift. So the period equals 2 pi. Amplitude equals 2. Phase shift equals pi over 4. And the vertical shift equals 1. So let's make our table. Let's see that. Table. Our first point will be negative pi over 4. And our last point will be 7 pi over 4. So in the middle of that, we have, we'll have 3 pi over 4. That'll give us pi over 4 here. And we'll have 5 pi over 4. So first we do 2 sine of 0, which will be, and then plus 1, which will be 1. Then we have 2 sine pi over 2 plus 1, which will be 3. Then we have 3 pi over 4, 2 sine, then will give us 2 sine of pi plus 1, that'll be 1. Then we have 5 pi over 4, which will be 2 sine 3 pi over 2 plus 1, that'll be -1. And then 2 sine 2 plus 1, and that'll be 1. So then we draw our graph. Okay. And we have our points, negative pi over 4, pi over 4, 3 pi over 4, 5 pi over 4, and 7 pi over 4. I'm going to go ahead and put some points. 1, 2, 3, 4, go up 5, then -1, -2, -3, -4, -5. So let's go ahead and graph this thing. So when it's at negative pi over 4, it'll be at 1. Then we'll go all the way up to 3 when it gets to pi over 4. Then we'll go back down to 1 when it gets to 3 pi over 4. Down to -1 when it's at 5 pi over 4. And back up to 1 when it's at 7 pi over 4. So wherever it's at y equals 1, wherever it crosses y equals 1, there will be a vertical asymptote. So let's go ahead and put that there. So we can go ahead and graph our cosecant, which will look like that. And it'll look like that. And with all that, we can erase our cosine, or our sine graphing. And that'll give us our cosecant graph.